The February wind whistled between the buildings on Eugene's main street, stirring up dust and snow. The town woke up slowly, as always. Stores opened at 9, and the first customers showed up at Mary's Diner around 7 in the morning. Life in Oklahoma was slow, especially in a place like Eugene with its 20,000 residents. Ralph Reynolds stood at the window of his small apartment on Main Street, watching the city come to life. At 24, he looked older than his years, not from hard work, but from the constant burden of responsibility he carried on his shoulders. His mother, Rosa, was sleeping in the next room, and even through the closed door, her heavy sighs could be heard. Lung cancer spared no one, especially those who couldn't afford the best treatment. "Ralph, dear, could you bring me some water?" His mother's weak voice made him tear himself away from the window. "Of course, Mom." He poured a glass of water and added a few drops of painkiller. The doctor said it helped, but Ralph could see that his mother was getting worse every day. On the bedside table was a stack of unpaid bills for medicine, for specialist consultations, for procedures. The numbers were growing faster than he could pay them. "How's work?" Rosa asked, taking the glass with trembling hands. "Fine," Ralph lied. "The boss says he might give me a raise." Officially, he worked at Frank's Grocery, a local grocery store, for $8 an hour, 30 hours a week. It was enough for food and rent, but not for medical treatment. He made real money at night, and his mother didn't know about it. In another part of town, Oscar Thornton sat in his office at Eugene Community Bank, reviewing the morning reports. At 45, he was the epitome of small-town success: deputy bank manager, a house in the prestigious Oakhurst neighborhood, a wife who was a teacher, and 2 children in college. His desk was adorned with a family photo. He was hugging Judith, and their children, Emily and Jason, were smiling next to them. But this morning, Oscar couldn't concentrate on the numbers. Yesterday's meeting was still spinning in his head. Ralph was different, not his usual self, more demanding, and those hints that the relationship needs to be more honest. What did that mean? "Mr. Thornton?" His secretary peeked into the office. "Your wife called. She reminded you about the parent-teacher conference tonight." "Thanks, Betty." Oscar glanced at his watch. He had 10 hours left before he would see Ralph. They had been seeing each other once a week for 8 months, and every time Oscar swore to himself that it would be the last. But he kept coming back. There was something about Ralph that made him forget about caution, about his reputation, about what might happen if someone found out. At Eugene's school, Judith Thornton was preparing for a parent-teacher conference. At 42, she was still attractive, but lately she had been seeing fatigue in the mirror that no amount of makeup could hide. 20 years of marriage, 2 children, a job. Her life was full, but something had changed. Oscar had become distant. He was staying late at work more often and was distracted at home. These were classic signs she had seen in other couples. Judith wanted to believe it was just stress at work, but her female intuition told her otherwise. "Mrs. Thornton, Jimmy Morris's parents would like to talk to you about his grades," said a colleague. "Of course, send them right over." Judith smiled and prepared herself for the conversation, pushing her own problems to the back of her mind. Here at school, she was in control. At home, things were more complicated. By lunchtime, Ralph had finished his shift at the store and went to his mother's house. Rosa had slept most of the day. The medication made her drowsy. He quietly went into the kitchen and took the rolled-up bills out of an old coffee can. $100 was all he had, and the bill for the last examination was $450. Ralph picked up the phone and dialed a familiar number. "Dr. Harris's clinic, how can I help you?" "This is Ralph Reynolds. I'm calling about the bill for my mother, Rosa Reynolds." "One moment, please." "Yes, Mr. Reynolds. Your balance is $720. When can you make the payment?" "I need a little more time." "I understand, but we can't continue treatment without partial payment. At least half the amount." Ralph closed his eyes. "By Friday. I'll pay by Friday." He knew only one way to get that kind of money quickly, and that way required changing the rules of the game. That evening, Oscar sat at the parent-teacher conference next to Judith, but his mind was far away. The principal was talking about new programs, parents were asking questions, and he was thinking about the meeting that would take place in an hour. "What do you say, dear?" Judith touched his hand. "Sorry, what?" "About the alumni trip. Emily wants to go to Dallas for spring break." "Yes, of course, if it's not too expensive." Judith frowned. Oscar had always been generous with the children. Why was he suddenly worried about money? After the meeting, they walked to the car in silence. Judith wanted to say something but didn't know how to start. Oscar kept checking his phone. "Do you need to go back to the office?" she asked. "Yes, something urgent. Don't wait up for me." Another lie. They were piling up like snow, and soon an avalanche would be inevitable. Ralph waited in his car in the parking lot near an old warehouse on the outskirts of Eugene. It was their usual meeting place, secluded enough that no one would see them, but not so remote as to arouse suspicion. He rehearsed the words he would say to Oscar. No threats, not yet. Just an explanation of the new circumstances. Car headlights illuminated the empty parking lot. Oscar arrived on time, as always. Punctuality was one of his obsessive habits. Ralph got out of his car and walked toward the familiar sedan. "Hi." Oscar looked more tense than usual. "We need to talk," Ralph said, not wasting time on pleasantries. "About what?" "About how our relationship is going to change." There was something new in Ralph's voice, a determination that Oscar hadn't heard before, and it scared him. They got into Oscar's car as usual, but the conversation that began that night was anything but normal. "My mother needs money for medical treatment," Ralph began. "A lot of money. I already pay you well, not well enough, and I don't think it would be a problem for someone in your position to help out a little more." Oscar felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean. Deputy bank manager, family man, pillar of the community. I wonder what your wife would say if she found out who you spend your evenings with." "Ralph, that's not a threat, it's just reality. We both have something to lose, but you have more." Oscar sat silently, realizing that everything had changed. The relationship he had considered purely business had suddenly taken on a completely different character. "How much do you need?" "500 now, and another 500 in a month." "That's crazy." "It's survival, for both of us." Ralph got out of the car, leaving Oscar alone with his new reality. In Eugene, a game was beginning, one with rules that no one knew. Judith was awake when Oscar returned home at midnight. She lay in the dark, listening to him quietly climbing the stairs. The scent of a different cologne lingered faintly in the air. "How was work?" she asked when he lay down beside her. "Difficult client. Had to sort things out for a long time." Another lie. Judith closed her eyes and tried to fall asleep, but sleep would not come. Something was happening in her marriage, and she was afraid to find out what it was. Monday began for Oscar with a trip to the bank at 7 in the morning, 2 hours earlier than usual. He couldn't sleep after yesterday's conversation with Ralph and tossed and turned in bed until Judith woke up and asked if everything was okay. He lied and said he had a headache. In the empty bank building, Oscar turned on his computer and opened his personal account. $5,000 in savings, the result of many years of caution and planning. Ralph wanted 500 of that today, another 500 in a month. And then what? The demands would only grow. "Mr. Thornton, you're early today." Betty, the secretary, entered the office with a cup of coffee. "Lots of work," he replied, quickly closing the window with the bank transactions. "By the way, Mrs. Thornton called. She asked if you'd be home for dinner. She has something important to discuss." Oscar's heart skipped a beat. Important? Did Judith suspect something? He forced himself to smile. "Tell her I'll try." At the same time, in a trailer park on the southern outskirts of Eugene, Detective Melinda Connor was examining the scene of a robbery. At 38, she was one of 3 detectives at the Eugene Police Department, and cases more serious than bicycle theft were rare. But the last 2 weeks had been an exception. "Third case this month," said Officer Davis, a young, ambitious cop. "Someone's targeting lonely old people." Melinda studied the scattered items in the small trailer. Mrs. Henderson, a 70-year-old widow, was in the hospital with a concussion. The burglar took very little, Just $100 and some jewelry. But the violence was unnecessary. Any witnesses? Melinda asked. A neighbor saw a young man near the trailer last night. Tall, thin. That's all she could say. Melinda jotted down the information in her notebook. In towns like Eugene, crimes were usually simple. Domestic disputes, drunken brawls, drug-related thefts. But this series seemed more calculated. Check the security footage from all the stores within a 3-block radius, she ordered. And talk to the local bartenders. Someone's spending easy money. Ralph woke up at noon with a headache and a bitter taste in his mouth. Yesterday's conversation with Oscar replayed over and over in his head. He had crossed the line, and now there was no turning back. In the next room, his mother was coughing. A deep, painful cough that was getting worse every day. Ralph got up and looked in on her. Rose was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding a handkerchief in her hands. There were red stains on it. "Mom, you need to lie down," he said, helping her get comfortable. "Ralph, dear, I don't want to be a burden." "You're not a burden. Don't ever say that." He kissed her on the forehead and went into the kitchen. On the table was a new bill from the clinic, $840 for last week's treatments. Added to the previous debt, it came to almost $1,500. The phone rang, an unfamiliar number. "Hello? Ralph? This is Dr. Harris. I need to talk to you about your mother's treatment." Ralph's stomach clenched. Is something wrong? The latest test results show that the disease is progressing. We need to start more aggressive therapy, but without paying off the current debt. "Doctor, I understand. Give me until Wednesday." "Ralph, I sympathize with your situation, but I have obligations to the clinic." After the doctor hung up, Ralph sat down at the kitchen table and covered his face with his hands. The $500 from Oscar only partially solved the problem. He needed more, and he needed it fast. He took out his phone and found Oscar's contact information. "Let's meet tonight. I have a proposal that will interest you." At Eugene's school, Judith was teaching a history class to 9th graders, but her mind was elsewhere. Last night, she woke up to find Oscar sitting in the living room, staring out the window. When she asked what was wrong, he said he couldn't sleep because of problems at work. "Mrs. Thornton?" One of the students raised his hand. "You said the Civil War started in 1861, but the textbook says..." "I'm sorry, Jake. Yes, you're right. 1861. She forced herself to concentrate on the lesson, but she couldn't shake her uneasiness. After school, Judith decided to do something she had never done before. Drive past the bank to see if Oscar was really there. His car was in the parking lot, but something made her stay and watch. At 5:30, Oscar left the building, but instead of driving home, he headed in the opposite direction, toward the old industrial part of town. Judith hesitated. It seemed wrong to follow her husband, but her suspicions were eating away at her. She started her car and followed him at a distance. Oscar parked near an abandoned warehouse. Judith stopped around the corner and watched as a young man approached him. They spoke briefly. Oscar handed him an envelope, and the young man left. Judith's heart was beating so loudly that she was sure it could be heard outside. This didn't seem like a romance. What was it more like, blackmail? When Oscar drove away, Judith sat in her car for another minute, trying to make sense of what she had seen. Then she turned around and drove home, not knowing what to do with this new information. Ralph counted the money in the envelope, $500 as agreed. But it still wasn't enough. Tomorrow he would go to the clinic and make a partial payment, but the debt remained enormous. He took out his phone and texted Oscar again. "We need to talk more. The situation has changed." The reply came half an hour later. "What else do you want?" "Not over the phone. Tomorrow, same place, same time." None of the main characters slept well that night. Oscar lay next to Judith, sensing that she was awake but not knowing what to say. Judith tried to make sense of what she had seen near the warehouse. Ralph sat by his mother's bed, listening to her heavy breathing and planning how to ask Oscar for more money. And Melinda Connor studied the crime scene photos, feeling like she was missing something important. In her experience, when strange things started happening in a small town, it meant only one thing. Something much more serious was about to happen. On Tuesday morning, Judith made a decision. She called her sister Carol, who lived in a neighboring town and worked as a private investigator after leaving the police force. "Carol, I need your help. I don't know what Oscar's gotten himself into, but it's serious." "Judy, are you sure you want to know the truth?" "No, but I can't live in the dark." "Okay, send me his photo and work information. I'll see what I can find out." After talking to her sister, Judith felt like a traitor, but her fear for her family's future was stronger. Oscar was nervous and distracted all day. He made 2 mistakes in simple calculations, which his clients noticed. By evening, his hands were shaking as he signed documents. "Mr. Thornton, are you feeling all right?" Betty asked. "Just tired, a lot of work." But it wasn't fatigue, it was fear. Ralph wanted to meet again, and that meant new demands. How long would this go on? A month? A year? A lifetime? The meeting took place at the same warehouse. Ralph was more direct than usual. "My mother needs urgent surgery. It will cost $10,000. Oscar turned pale. "I don't have that kind of money." "Find it. You have a house, a car, savings, and most importantly, you have a reputation you don't want to lose." "This is crazy. I can't." "You can, and you will, because you won't like the alternative." Ralph took out his phone and showed Oscar several photos, their meetings, their conversations in the car. "This isn't a threat," he said calmly. "It's insurance, for both of us." Oscar looked at the photos, feeling the world crumble around him. In one photo, they were sitting in the car too close to each other. In another, Oscar was handing Ralph money. To an outside observer, everything looked exactly as it was. "You have a week," Ralph said, putting his phone away. "In the meantime, here's another $500 for expenses." After the meeting, Oscar sat in his car trying to collect himself. $10,000. That was more than half of their savings. Judith would notice that kind of money. And if she started asking questions, his phone rang. "Judith. Honey, will you be home soon? We have guests. The Martinez stopped by for coffee." "Yes, I'm on my way." He forced himself to smile and drove home to play the role of a loving husband and father. But the mask was becoming heavier with each passing day. An unpleasant surprise awaited him at home. Judith was sitting in the living room with the neighbors, but there was something different in her gaze. More attentive, studious. "How's work?" she asked after the guests had left. "Same as usual, lots of paperwork." "You look tired. Maybe you should take some time off." "No, now's not the time." Judith nodded, but Oscar noticed that she wasn't looking away. It was as if she was trying to read something in his face. "Oscar, if you're having problems, you can talk to me. We can get through this together." For a moment, he wanted to tell her everything, to tell her the whole truth about Ralph, about the money, about the trap he had fallen into. But then he imagined Judith's expression when she found out, and he kept quiet. "Everything's fine, just a lot of work." That night, Melinda Connor received a call from the hospital. Mrs. Henderson had regained consciousness and wanted to give a statement. "He was young," said the elderly woman, holding her bandaged head. "About 25, tall, dark hair. He was very polite, called me ma'am." "Have you seen him before?" "I think so. He works at Frank's grocery store. I've seen him there." Melinda wrote down the information. Tomorrow she would go to the store and talk to the staff. In a small town, threads always intertwined in the most unexpected ways. Wednesday began with panic for Oscar. He woke up in a cold sweat, his sleep interrupted by nightmares of being exposed. In his dream, Judith read compromising photos aloud in front of the entire community, and the children turned away from him in disgust. Judith was silent at breakfast, which was unusual for her. Usually in the morning, she would talk about her plans for the day, discuss the news or school matters. Today, she just drank her coffee and studied his face. "Honey, is everything okay?" he asked, trying to sound normal. "Yes, just thinking about one of my students. He's having problems at home." Oscar nodded, unaware that the student was himself, and that the problems at home were his double life, which his wife was slowly but methodically uncovering. An unpleasant surprise awaited him at the bank. Chief Executive Robert Phillips was sitting in his office with a serious expression on his face. "Oscar, sit down. We need to talk." His heart began to race. Is something wrong? An audit has revealed some irregularities in your transactions. Nothing critical, but there are some questions. Phillips opened a folder with documents. Several large withdrawals from your personal account over the last month. You're usually very conservative in your spending. Oscar forced himself to smile. Judith insisted on renovating the kitchen. You know how women love to change things around the house. Of course, I understand, but the bank is required to monitor unusual financial patterns among all employees, especially management. After his boss left, Oscar closed the office door and sat down at his desk, holding his head in his hands. If the bank started closely monitoring his finances, how would he explain the withdrawal of $10,000? What if Ralph demanded even more? He took out his phone and texted Ralph. I can't give you $10,000. It'll attract attention. $3,000 maximum, and in installments. The reply came a minute later. Then let's meet and discuss alternatives. Today, at the usual time. At that moment, Detective Melinda Connor was talking to the manager of Frank's Grocery, a grocery store. Ralph Reynolds? Yes, he's been working here for 2 years, said Frank Miller, an elderly man with a kind face. He's a good guy, a little withdrawn lately. Can I talk to him? He doesn't work until this evening. What's going on? Did he do something wrong? We're just checking some information for another case. Melinda looked around the store. It was a typical provincial grocery store. Narrow aisles, old refrigerators, cash registers that looked like they were from the 1980s. If Ralph was really robbing elderly people, the motive was obvious. You can't make much money in a place like this. Does Ralph have any problems? She asked Frank. His mother is very ill, cancer. The guy looks exhausted, but he never complains. He even takes extra shifts when he can. Interesting. A mother's illness is a strong motive for desperate acts. Melinda decided to come back in the evening and talk to Ralph in person. Rosa Reynolds was having a bad day. She hardly got out of bed, and her cough became so severe that her neighbors could hear every coughing fit through the thin walls. Ralph took the day off from the store and spent the whole day caring for his mother. Ralph, dear, she called weakly as evening approached. I don't want you to spend all your money on my treatment. Mom, don't be silly. Listen to me. I've had a good life. I've had a wonderful son, that's enough. Ralph squeezed her hand. Don't give up. The doctor said the operation might help. How much does it cost? He paused. That's not your concern. How much, Ralph? $10,000. Rose closed her eyes. Where are you going to get that kind of money? I'll find a way. After his mother fell asleep, Ralph sat in the kitchen thinking about his options. $3,000 from Oscar was better than nothing, but it wasn't enough. He had to convince him to give more or find other sources of income. He remembered his nighttime side jobs. Oscar wasn't the only one who used his services. There were other clients, though they were irregular. Maybe it was time to offer them similar investment opportunities. The phone rang. Melinda Connor. Ralph Reynolds, Detective Connor, Eugene Police Department. I need to ask you a few questions. About what? We'd better talk in person. Will you be home in an hour? Yes, I am. What's going on? I'll tell you when I see you. After talking to the police, Ralph felt panic rising. What did they know? About his work as an escort? About the money from Oscar? Or was it something else? He texted Oscar. We need to meet urgently. The police are asking questions. That evening, Detective Melinda arrived at Ralph's home. The small apartment on the second floor of an old building looked clean but poor. The sound of coughing came from the next room. Is your mother home? Melinda asked. Yes, she's sick. Can we talk quietly? They sat down at the kitchen table. Melinda took out her notebook. Several witnesses saw a young man matching your description near the homes of the robbery victims. Where were you last Tuesday evening? Ralph felt relieved. It wasn't about his main job. At work, in the store, I worked until 10. And on Saturday? At home, taking care of my mother. My neighbors can confirm that. Melinda wrote down his answers. His alibi seemed credible, but something about the young man's behavior was alarming. He was too nervous for someone who was innocent. Are you having financial difficulties? She asked. Like everyone else. My mother's treatment is expensive. I understand. If you remember anything that might help the investigation, give us a call." After the detective left, Ralph locked himself in the bathroom and threw up. The stress had been building up, and his body needed release. He would soon be meeting Oscar, and a lot would depend on that conversation. At 7 o'clock, Judith received a call from her sister Carol. "Judy, I found out something about your husband." "What exactly?" "He regularly meets a young man near the old warehouse on Industrial Street. He's giving him money. It could be blackmail? Possibly, or drugs, or something else, but definitely nothing good." Judith sat silently, digesting the information. Blackmail seemed more likely than drugs. Oscar had never even drunk alcohol in large quantities. What should I do? "Nothing for now. Let's keep watching. But be careful, Judy. If someone is blackmailing your husband, it could be dangerous." Ralph and Oscar met at their usual place at 8:30. Oscar looked worse than usual. Pale, haggard, his hands shaking. "What's the story with the police?" he asked immediately. "I'm suspected of robbing elderly people, but it's nonsense. I have an alibi." "What if they start digging deeper?" "They won't. They have no evidence." Ralph got into the car next to Oscar. "Listen, we need to change the terms of the deal." "What do you mean?" 3,000 is not enough, but I understand your limitations, so I have an alternative." Oscar looked at him warily. "What is it?" "You help me get a loan from your bank. 10,000, secured by something fictitious. We'll draw up the documents so they don't arouse suspicion." "That's impossible. Bank fraud is a federal crime. And our relationship isn't a crime in the eyes of society?" Ralph took out his phone and showed him new photos, more compromising ones, taken from different angles. In one, they were holding hands. In another, Oscar was whispering something in his ear. "Choose," Ralph said calmly. "Either you help me with the loan, or the whole community will see these photos, including your wife and children." Oscar looked at the pictures, feeling the last remnants of his former life crumble to dust. In the photos, he didn't see himself. He saw a stranger capable of things that had once seemed unthinkable. "I need time to think. Until Friday. On Friday, my mother is going in for surgery, or what? Or the whole community will find out what their respected banker is really like." After the meeting, Oscar didn't go home right away. He drove around the empty streets of Eugene, trying to find a way out of his trap. Bank fraud could cost him not only his job and reputation, but also a prison sentence. But refusing Ralph's demands meant immediate exposure. At 10 o'clock in the evening, he parked near his house and saw Judith in the living room window. She was waiting for him as always, a faithful wife, a caring mother, a pillar of the community. He imagined her face when she saw the photos, and he felt sick. "How are you?" Judith asked when he entered the house. "Fine. Late meetings with clients. Every day?" He stopped in the middle of the living room. "What do you mean?" "Nothing in particular. You've just been very busy." There was something new in her voice, not suspicion, but knowledge. It was as if she already knew the answers to her questions. "Judith, if you have questions, I only have one request. Whatever happens, remember, the children must not suffer." Oscar felt a chill in his stomach. What did she know? "What are you talking about?" "Just remember that." Judith went upstairs, leaving him alone with his thoughts and fears. The house was quiet, but the silence was oppressive, like the calm before a storm. In his apartment, Ralph sat by his mother's bed, holding her hand. Rosa slept restlessly, muttering something in her sleep. The doctor said that without surgery, she had 2 or 3 weeks left. Ralph knew he had crossed a line by asking Oscar to commit bank fraud. But there was no alternative. His mother was dying, time was running out, and other ways of getting the money would take too long. He looked at the photos on his phone. Oscar looked happy in them, relaxed, smiling, alive. Ralph almost regretted having to destroy that life. Almost. "I'm sorry," he whispered to his sleeping mother. "I'm sorry for what I have to do." At the police station, Melinda was studying the robbery case. Something about her conversation with Ralph bothered her. He was too nervous, too cautious. His alibis were solid, but her intuition told her he was hiding something. She opened a file on her computer and began checking Ralph's financial history. His salary at the store, his mother's medical bills, his rent. Nothing unusual at first glance. But then, where was the money for his living expenses coming from? The numbers didn't add up. "Working late?" asked the officer on duty. "Something about this case is bothering me. Tomorrow I'll talk to Reynolds' neighbors, find out what they know about his lifestyle." It was almost midnight, and the main characters in the drama were still awake. Oscar lay in the dark next to the sleeping Judith, mentally going over his options. Ralph sat by the window, watching the empty street and waiting for Friday. Judith pretended to be asleep, thinking over the information she had received from her sister. Friday dawned gray and rainy. Ralph woke up to the sound of an ambulance passing by the window and for a moment thought it was his mother. But Rosa was lying in her bed, breathing with difficulty, but alive. "Mom, how are you feeling?" "Bad, dear. Very bad." Her voice was even weaker than yesterday. Her skin had taken on an unhealthy yellowish tint, and her breathing was shallow. There was indeed no time left. Ralph checked his phone. No messages from Oscar. That meant the banker was still hesitating, weighing his options, looking for a way out. But there was no way out. Not for the two of them. At 7:30 in the morning, the phone rang. It was Dr. Harris. "Ralph, we need to hospitalize your mother today. Her condition is critical." "What about the operation?" "We can't start surgery without payment in advance, but supportive care in the hospital will prolong her life for a few days." "Doctor, give me until this evening. I'll have the money." "Ralph, until this evening, please." After talking to the doctor, Ralph wrote to Oscar, "Today is the last day. My mother will be hospitalized in the evening. Either you help, or tomorrow morning your wife will receive the photos." At the bank, Oscar was like a zombie all day. He automatically signed documents, answered customers' questions, and smiled at his colleagues. But inside, a hurricane was raging. Bank fraud is a federal crime. A minimum of 5 years in prison for a first offense. And with his position and access to the systems, it could be 10. But the alternative seemed even worse. Exposure, scandal, the destruction of his family, the loss of everything. "Mr. Thornton," Betty peeked into the office. "Your wife called. She asked if you'd be home for dinner." "Tell her I will. I'll definitely be there." Maybe this would be his last normal dinner with his family. Tomorrow everything would change. Either he would become a criminal, or everyone would find out the truth about his double life. By dinner time, Oscar had made up his mind. He would hack into the bank system, create a fake loan in someone else's name, and transfer the money to an account that Ralph had access to. Then he would gradually cover his tracks. The risk was enormous, but there was no other way. At that moment, Judith was meeting her sister at Mary's diner on the outskirts of town. "They met again last night," Carol reported. "The conversation was tense. Your husband looked upset." "And the young man?" "Calm, confident, as if he's in control of the situation." Judith stirred her coffee without looking up. "What should I do? If I ask Oscar directly, he might what?" "Judy, if your husband is being blackmailed, this is serious. Maybe you should go to the police." "And destroy the family?" "The family is already falling apart. The question is whether it can be saved." After meeting with her sister, Judith got into her car and cried. 20 years of marriage, 2 children, shared dreams and plans, all of it was hanging by a thread, and she didn't know how to stop it. At the grocery store, Ralph worked his day shift in a daze. Customers asked him for items, and he showed them where to find them. Everything was as usual, but inside, the tension was growing. "Ralph, you don't look well," said Frank, the store owner. "Maybe you should go home early?" "No, I'm fine. How's your mother?" "She's in the hospital. She needs an operation, but we don't have the money." Frank shook his head sympathetically. "If you need help, let me know. We can organize a fundraiser among our regular customers." "Thanks, but it's a very expensive operation." After work, Ralph drove to the hospital. His mother was lying in the intensive care unit, hooked up to IVs and monitors. She was unconscious most of the time. "Her condition is stable but serious," said the nurse. "But if the operation is performed within the next 24 hours, there is a chance." "A chance of what?" of extending her life by several months, maybe a year. Ralph sat down next to the bed and took his mother's hand. "Mom, I'll find the money. I promise." At 6 in the evening, he wrote to Oscar, "Let's meet at 8. Final decision." The reply came half an hour later. "I'll be there." Detective Melinda spent the day interviewing Ralph's neighbors. An interesting picture emerged. "A good boy," said Mrs. Parker, an elderly neighbor. "He takes care of his mother, but sometimes he goes out at night. He comes back late." "How late?" "After midnight. He has a key and comes up the stairs quietly." "How often does this happen?" "Once or twice a week. I think he has a side job. His mother's medical bills are expensive." Other neighbors told similar stories. Ralph was quiet, polite, but secretive. No one knew what he did at night. "Yesterday I saw a man come to his house," added Mrs. Johnson. Middle-aged, wearing a suit. He looked upset. Melinda wrote down the information. Night work, unknown visitors, the need for money. It all added up to a picture that could explain the series of robberies. At 7 o'clock in the evening, Oscar was sitting at home having dinner with Judith. She had made his favorite dish, roast chicken with mashed potatoes, just like in the early years of their marriage. "Delicious," he said, though he couldn't taste it. "Remember how we dreamed of a big house when we got married?" Judith asked. "Of course. And we got it. What are you dreaming about now?" He looked at her. There was something strange in his wife's eyes, not condemnation but sadness. That everything would be fine, that the children would be happy, you would be healthy, and work wouldn't be stressful. If you could start all over again, what would you change? The question sounded like a sentence. Judith knew something. "Honey, just answer me. I would have been more honest. With you, with myself." Judith nodded and continued eating in silence. After dinner, Oscar went upstairs to change. "Work again?" she asked. "Yes, an urgent meeting." "Be careful." B. At 8 o'clock in the evening, Ralph was already waiting in the parking lot outside the warehouse. The rain had intensified, and drops were drumming on the roof of the car. In his jacket pocket was a knife, his father's old folding knife, which he carried as a talisman. Today, for the first time in many years, he had taken it with him deliberately, as insurance. Oscar's headlights appeared in the twilight. The banker parked next to him and got out of the car. He looked terrible, pale, with bags under his eyes, his hands shaking. "Well?" Ralph asked when they got into Oscar's car. "I can't do it. Bank fraud it's a federal crime, I know, but you have no choice." Oscar took out his phone and showed Ralph his bank account. "Look, I've withdrawn all my savings, $7,000. That's all I have." "It's not enough." "Ralph, be reasonable. $7,000 is a lot of money, and fraud will ruin us both." "Nothing can ruin me anymore. My mother is dying. Without surgery, she has a few days left. I'm sorry, I really am. But I can't risk everything for what? Make a deal." Oscar fell silent, realizing he had said too much. "For some kid who sells his body?" he continued more quietly. "Yes, that's what you meant." Ralph felt rage rising in his chest. A boy who sells his body is saving his mother's life, and a respected banker buys what he can't get at home. "Don't." "What? The truth hurts? You think you're better than me? You have a home, a job, a family, and you buy sex from guys in parking lots." "Enough! No, stop! I'll do anything to save my mother, and you won't even lift a finger to help." Oscar turned away to the window. "Take 7,000, that's all." "That's not enough. That's all I've got." Ralph took out his phone. "Then tomorrow morning your wife will see the photos." "Do what you want. I can't do this anymore." "Can't or won't? I can't. Do you understand? I've reached my limit. Bank fraud is the end of everything." Ralph looked at Oscar, feeling hope turn to despair. Without the additional money, the operation was impossible. That meant his mother would die. "You know what?" he said slowly. "What if I tell the police about your little weaknesses? The detective is already interested in me. I wonder what she'll say when she finds out about our meetings." "What do you mean?" "Maybe I should tell her that a respected banker regularly meets with a young man and pays him money? How would she take that?" Oscar turned pale. "You wouldn't dare." I would. I have no other choice. This will ruin us both. I have nothing left to ruin. Ralph pulled a knife from his pocket and opened it with one swift movement. The blade flashed in the headlights of a passing car. What are you doing? Oscar tried to move away, but he was trapped in the corner of the car. What I should have done earlier, if you don't give me the money willingly. Ralph, stop. We can work this out. The time for negotiations is over. Ralph swung the knife, aiming for his chest. Oscar tried to protect himself by putting his arms up. The blade entered his forearm and he screamed in pain. Stop! Please! But Ralph was unable to stop. Months of despair, fear for his mother, and humiliation erupted into a fit of rage. He stabbed again, then again. Oscar tried to fight back, but his wounds were weakening him. Blood flooded the seat upholstery and fogged up the windows. His attempts to call for help turned into a rasp. 10,000, Ralph muttered, continuing to stab. Just 10,000 to save your life. Finally, Oscar stopped resisting. His body went limp, his eyes glazed over. The car was silent, except for the rain drumming on the roof. Ralph sat over the body, breathing heavily. The knife fell from his hands onto the floor. Only now did he realize what he had done. No, he whispered. No, no, no. He checked Oscar's pulse. Nothing. The banker was dead. Ralph jumped out of the car and stood in the rain for several minutes, not knowing what to do. Panic gave way to despair. He had killed a man. He had killed him for money that he would never get now. The phone in his pocket vibrated. A message from the hospital. Your mother's condition has worsened. Come immediately. Ralph looked at the car with Oscar's body, then at his phone. His mother was dying, and he had become a murderer, and it was all meaningless. He got into his car and drove to the hospital, leaving the crime scene behind. There was only one thought in his head: to get to his mother while she was still alive. An hour later, Oscar Thornton's body was discovered by a warehouse guard making his rounds. He immediately called the police. Detective Melinda Connor arrived at the scene at 10:30. After examining the car, she immediately realized that this was a crime of passion. Too many stab wounds, too much rage. Someone was very angry at the victim, said the forensic expert. Or very desperate, replied Melinda, examining the scene. In the back seat, she found an envelope with $7,000. The money hadn't been touched, so it wasn't a robbery. The motive was something else. Check the victim's ID, she ordered. Oscar Thornton, 45 years old, assistant bank manager, married, 2 children. Melinda frowned. A respected citizen killed in an abandoned parking lot with a large amount of cash. What was he doing here? Any witnesses? The security guard saw 2 cars around 8 p.m. One left right after the fight started. Description of the second car? An old Honda, dark in color. Did you see the license plate? Melinda wrote down the information. Honda was a popular brand among young people on a budget. Could this be the same young man she was looking for in connection with the robberies? At the hospital, Ralph sat at his dying mother's bedside. Rose was unconscious, but her breathing was becoming increasingly shallow. Son, the nurse put her hand on his shoulder. Maybe you should rest. We'll call you if there are any changes. No, I'll stay. He held his mother's hand and thought about what had happened in the parking lot. Oscar was dead, killed by him, Ralph, who had only wanted to save the life of the person he loved most. Mom, I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry for everything. At 5:30 in the morning, Rosa Reynolds died without regaining consciousness. Ralph sat next to her, holding her cooling hand, realizing that he had lost everything. Dawn on Saturday in Eugene was greeted by the wail of sirens and the flashing of red and blue lights near an old warehouse on Industrial Street. News of the murder of a respected banker spread through the city like wildfire. By 7 in the morning, journalists from local newspapers and television stations from neighboring cities had gathered at the police station. Detective Melinda Connor had been up all night coordinating the initial investigation. The results of the crime scene investigation confirmed her initial conclusions: a murder in the heat of passion, multiple stab wounds, signs of a struggle in the confined space of the car. What do we have? asked Police Chief Robert Henderson, who arrived at the station earlier than usual. The victim is Oscar Thornton, deputy manager of a local bank. He was killed last night between 8 and 9. $7,000 in cash was left untouched, so robbery can be ruled out. Motive? Not clear yet, but we have some leads. Melinda laid out the crime scene photos on the table. Thornton met someone here regularly. The security guard saw his car in this parking lot several times over the last month, always with another man. Drugs? Possibly. Or something personal. Hair not belonging to the victim was found in the back seat. It's been sent for DNA analysis. Henderson nodded. What about the family? They haven't been notified yet. I want to get more information first. At that moment, Judith Thornton was preparing breakfast, glancing at the clock from time to time. Oscar hadn't come home. For the first time in 20 years of marriage, he had spent the night away without warning. His phone wasn't answering. At first, she was angry. Then she became worried. By 7 o'clock, fear had taken over all other emotions. The home phone rang. Mrs. Thornton? Detective Connor, Eugene Police Department. I need to talk to you. Can I come over? Judith's heart skipped a beat. Has something happened to Oscar? We'd better talk in person. I'll be there in half an hour. After the call, Judith sat down on the sofa in the living room, looking at family photos. 20 years of marriage, 2 children, a home together. Was it all over? The phone rang again. It was Carol. Judy, have you heard the news? There's been a murder in town. A banker. Oscar, Judith whispered. What? Judy, no, it can't be Oscar. But Judith already knew. The intuition that had been warning her for months about impending doom had finally been confirmed. Detective Melinda arrived at the Thornton home at 7:30. A beautiful 2-story house in a prestigious neighborhood, a well-kept lawn, children's bicycles on the porch, the picture of the perfect American family. Judith met her at the door. Her face was pale but calm, like someone who had already accepted the inevitable. He's dead, isn't he? Melinda nodded. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Thornton. Your husband was found murdered last night. Judith covered her face with her hands and cried quietly, not from grief, but from relief. The agonizing uncertainty was finally over. Where did it happen? She asked, wiping away her tears. In an industrial parking lot near an old warehouse. Do you know why he might have been there? Judith paused, weighing how much she could tell her. Detective, I knew Oscar was meeting someone there. My sister had been following him for the last 2 weeks. Following him? Why? I suspected he was cheating on me, or something worse. Melinda took out her notebook. Tell me more. Oscar changed a few months ago. He became secretive, nervous. He stayed late at work and disappeared in the evenings. I asked my sister to follow him, and what did she find out? That he regularly meets a young man at this parking lot. He gives him money. Melinda looked up from her notebook. What did this man look like? About 25, tall, thin, dark hair. My sister said he seemed confident, like he was in control. The description matched the robbery suspect. Melinda felt the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. Mrs. Thornton, I need to ask you a sensitive question. Did your husband have any unconventional tendencies? Judith sighed. Maybe. He became very cold in recent years. We hardly spoke, you understand. I thought it was because of stress at work. After talking to the widow, Melinda drove to the hospital. She needed to talk to Ralph Reynolds. There were too many coincidences. A young man, a need for money, a sick mother, suspicions of other crimes. At the hospital, she learned that Rosa Reynolds had died that morning, and her son was still in the ward. Ralph was sitting in a chair next to the bed where his mother's body lay covered with a sheet. He wasn't crying. There were no tears left, only emptiness and the realization that it had all been for nothing. Mr. Reynolds? He looked up and saw Detective Connor. I need to talk to you. My mother died, he said quietly. I know, my condolences, but I have some questions. Ralph looked at the detective, then at his mother's body. She died because we didn't have money for the operation. Tell me where you were last night between 8 and 10. Here, at the hospital. Can anyone confirm that? Ralph paused. The nurse had only seen him after midnight when he arrived after what had happened in the parking lot. I don't remember. I was in shock. Melinda studied his face. Nervousness, evasive answers, red eyes, classic signs of someone hiding something important. Mr. Reynolds, did you know Oscar Thornton? Ralph felt the blood drain from his face. Who is he? The assistant manager of the local bank. He was found murdered last night. I don't know anyone by that name, but his reaction said otherwise. Melinda decided to press harder. Mr. Thornton regularly met with a young man in the parking lot near the warehouse. He was handing him money. The description of that man matches yours. Ralph remained silent, staring at his mother's covered body. Do you have a car? The detective continued. A 2015 Honda Civic. Dark blue? Yes. Can you show me the keys? Ralph automatically fumbled in his pocket for the keys and handed them to the detective. Melinda noticed dark spots on the metal, possibly blood. Mr. Reynolds, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Oscar Thornton. You have the right to remain silent. Ralph listened to Miranda's words, never taking his eyes off his mother. When the detective finished, he said, "Can I say goodbye to her?" Of course. He stood up, walked over to the bed, and kissed his mother on the forehead. I'm sorry, Mom. I couldn't save you. On the way to the police station, Ralph was silent. The city outside the car window looked normal. People were going to work. Children were playing in the yards. Life was going on. But for him, it was all over. At the station, Melinda showed him photos from the crime scene. Do you recognize this car? Ralph nodded. And this man? She showed him a photo of Oscar. Another nod. Do you want to tell us what happened? Ralph was silent for a long time, then began to speak slowly, with long pauses. We had been seeing each other for several months. He paid me for my company. When my mother fell ill, I asked him to lend me some money. He agreed. But that wasn't enough? The operation cost $10,000. I didn't have that much time to earn it. And you decided to blackmail him? I didn't want to, but I had no choice. My mother was dying. Melinda wrote down his statement. What happened last night? I asked him to help me get a loan from the bank. He refused. He said he could only give me $7,000 from his savings. And you killed him over $3,000? Ralph looked up at the detective. It wasn't about the money. It was about how he said it. How exactly? Like I was worthless. Like my mother's life was worthless. He called me a boy who sells his body. And you got angry? Yes, I did. Very angry. I took out a knife just to scare him, but he started fighting back and Ralph covered his face with his hands. I didn't mean to kill him. I swear. I just wanted money for my mother. That evening, relatives and friends gathered at the Thornton home. Judith accepted condolences with a stony face. Her children, Emily and Jason, arrived from college, shocked and confused. Mom, what happened? Why was Dad killed? Emily asked. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, Judith replied, not ready to tell the truth about their father's double life. Carol took her sister aside. What are you going to tell them? Nothing. See you later. Maybe never. Why ruin their memory of their father? But what about the truth? The truth is that Oscar loved them. The rest doesn't matter. Late that night, after the guests had left, Judith sat in her husband's study, going through his papers. In a drawer, she found an envelope with money, about $2,000, and a note, for Judy and the kids, if anything happens. Oscar knew he was taking a risk. He was preparing for the worst, and still he couldn't stop himself. In the holding cell, Ralph lay on his cot, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would be the preliminary hearing, followed by the official arraignment. The court-appointed lawyer had mentioned the possibility of a deal with the prosecution, a guilty plea in exchange for a reduced sentence. Second-degree manslaughter, the lawyer explained. 10 to 20 years. Considering your clean record and mitigating circumstances, maybe 15 years with the possibility of parole after 10. 15 years. Ralph tried to imagine himself at 39, walking out of prison into a completely different world. His mother would be long dead. He would have no friends left. He would have to start his life from scratch. A week later, An article about the case appeared in the local newspaper, the Eugene Herald. The headline read, "Tragedy of Despair: How Need Drove a Man to Murder." The reporter gathered statements from neighbors, colleagues, and doctors. The portrait that emerged was surprisingly sympathetic. "Ralph Reynolds was not a criminal in the classic sense," wrote the author. "He was a young man whose circumstances had driven him into a corner. This is a story about how the lack of accessible health care can push ordinary people to desperate acts." The article provoked an unexpected reaction in the community. Many residents spoke out in support of Ralph and organized a fundraiser to pay for his lawyer. A petition was launched to seek a lighter sentence, but there were also those who condemned him. The congregation of the local Baptist church, where the Thorntons were active members, was particularly vocal. "Murder is murder," said Pastor David Mills. "Whatever the motives, taking a life is unacceptable." The trial lasted 3 days. Ralph pleaded guilty to manslaughter. The prosecutor demanded the maximum sentence, while the defense asked for leniency. The testimony painted a complex picture. Doctors described Rose Reynolds' hopeless condition and astronomical medical bills. Neighbors described Ralph as a caring son. Colleagues at the store spoke of his hard work and honesty, but there was other testimony as well. Detective Connor spoke of a series of robberies that may also have been linked to Ralph. However, there was insufficient direct evidence to bring additional charges. Judith Thornton did not attend the trial. She decided it would be better for the family not to relive the details of Oscar's last months. The sentence was harsh: 18 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 12 years. The judge explained the decision by saying it was necessary to send a clear message to society that vigilante justice is unacceptable. Ralph listened to the sentence standing up. As he was led away in handcuffs, he looked around the courtroom and saw several familiar faces: former colleagues, neighbors, casual acquaintances. Their eyes betrayed a range of emotions: sympathy, condemnation, curiosity. A year after the tragedy, life in Eugene returned to normal. A new assistant manager was hired at the bank. Judith continued to work at the school, raising her children and trying not to think about the past. The house on Oakhurst Street was sold. There were too many memories.